Hail GFOP! Before we get to the pod, we've got an announcement from the good people at SeatGeek. For those unfamiliar, SeatGeek's a startup ticket company that helps you to see your favourite footballers' neck tattoos and ill-advised haircuts live and in person. I've got to tell you, I love SeatGeek. When you try it out, it will change your life, says the man who has just scored some Sigur Rós tickets off aforementioned SeatGeek. They are now giving one lucky GFOP a chance to go to an International Champions Cup game. For a chance to win, all you have to do is download the SeatGeek app or sign up at SeatGeek.com. Go to the settings tab, click add a promo code, enter that promo code GFOP, that's GFOP, and SeatGeek will send you $20 after you've made your first ticket purchase. Thank you, SeatGeek. And just to satisfy the Men in Blazers Small Council, we have to tell you, no purchase necessary, void where prohibited, open to all legal residents over the age of 18. Visit SeatGeek.com/rules for official rules. Even if you don't win, the promo code GFOP will still get you a $20 rebate on your first SeatGeek purchase. But if you can't make the ICC, SeatGeek's also now, oh my lord, the official ticketing partner of Major League Soccer. That should have angel noises. SeatGeek is working with Don Garber, no, the league, and its teams to introduce a new ticket buying experience that will make it easier for you to buy, sell, share, access tickets to MLS matches. To the pod. Welcome to a Men in Blazers pod special. Our guest today is the head coach of your world champion and defending Olympic gold medalist, United States women's national team. Last summer, she delivered this country its third World Cup trophy, the first since 1999. She's English-born, Virginia-bred, a manager with football woven into her family tree. We welcome to the pod the soccer mind that returned the World Cup to its rightful home, the general who's about to oversee the USWNT's Olympic gold medal defence, one of our top 3 favourite technical writers turned football managers of all time, the one and only Jill Ellis.
Hey guys, how are you? Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, Jill, I'm so excited to have you on the show because there's so much about you that I admire. Starting with, in 1994, you gave up a $40,000 a year job as a technical writer with Northern Telecom to take an assistant coaching job at the University of Maryland, Go Terrapins, for $6,000 a year. You said you felt soccer urging you to return to it. What is it that you love about the game of soccer, Jill?
Everything. I know that's kind of vague, but I love everything about it. I love the supporters. I love the game itself, the tactics, the personalities. You know, I love sports, and I grew up playing sports, but soccer has just always been top of the list. And so I chose passion over a paycheck. And, you know, my mom was absolutely beside herself being a good Scotswoman, but my dad, you know, was like, he's a coach, and he's like, he got it. So I took a leap of faith, but I just love the game. And I think the best part of it, it's given me so many great relationships, this sport, and great friendships. And ultimately, that's kind of the biggest takeaway.
I have another podcast which is called Technical Writing Today. I also love technical writing, so I can only imagine the horns of the dilemma that you were on. You were about to go off to Brazil, the coda to what we call America's stealth summer of soccer, the Copa America Centenario, Euro 2016. Finally now, some good soccer with you going off to defend Olympic gold. I've got to ask you, did you watch the Euros, and how much does men's football translate through to the women's game? How much does it not?
I think it does. I mean, I think trends are trends. You know, right now, I mean, transition is such a big part of our game at the international level. You know, I didn't see that as much in that game. It was almost, you know, the highly organized defending. It wasn't as wide open as I think people and fans would have liked. But yeah, I mean, I certainly see, you know, whether it's specific tactics like building out with a three-back, dropping a midfielder. That's a trend that's been in the men's game for a long time. It's very popular now in the women's game. So there's specific nuances like that. But then I just think generally, I would say, much like the men's game, the women's game has elevated technically, athletically, and so there's just everything's happening a lot faster. I mean, back in the days when I supported Man United with Lou Macari and Stevie Coppell, everything now is just, they're world-class athletes now. And so I think, much from the women's game, the investment's been there, and now everything is much, much faster. The spaces are tighter. Decisions have to be quicker. Execution has to be more precise. I mean, I think that in general is very similar to the men's game.
My big takeaway from the Euros ahead of the Olympics is thank God that the Icelandic team didn't qualify for Rio. But you unveiled your squad of just 18 for the Olympics. I've tried to think a lot about that task, picking our best 18 women. I mean, depth of roster is one of the great American strengths. But before we get to that, I've got a youth development question. How do you understand that the US system develops so many world-class female players, but we're yet to work out how to develop world-class male players?
That's the million-dollar question. I think there are great players coming through our systems on both sides. I think, what people have to understand is, although soccer's been here, I know we had a team in the 50s. They beat England, by the way. But I think the women's game, we were right at the very inception of it in terms of the first World Cup. We put a team in there. And so we've been almost from the very beginning in the hunt, in the race, and that's allowed us to not just compete, but to kind of stay ahead. And we've had fantastic investment from, not just our federation, but from people in this country who love the game and want to grow the game. I mean, I never would have had the opportunities I have here if I'd stayed in England. So Americans are really forward thinkers in giving opportunities to women. So I think that's a big part of why the women have, from the very beginning, been competing. And I think the men, it takes time. We've heard this. Coaches love to talk about processes, but that's the reality. It does take time. I'm actually trying to put together a thing about style of play, and it's so hard to pin down because our strengths is all of our differences in this country, but then that makes it hard to get people on the same page at times. So it's a great problem in the sense we've got so many opinions, so many perceptions of the game, but then it is hard to say this is what we value and this is how we need to do it. I think on the women's side, we have very good vertical integration within our, not just our national teams programs, but, from top to bottom. One of my previous job, I really pushed hard as a youth director to have a lot of the clubs come in and see the national team programs. So you can create this buy-in and this cohesion, really. I think that's important. And that's tough. It's tough in this country. And that's, a little bit what the men are facing is it's a lot of highly educated people that have an opinion about the game, and getting everybody rowing in the same direction is sometimes a challenge.
Too much education, too many blessings. God love you, America. But you've just gone through a remarkable challenge. World Cup squad, 23 players. An Olympic squad, just 18 players. What's the hardest squad decision you had to make this time around, Jill?
I knew coming out of the World Cup that, there was going to be some changes in terms of, personnel retiring. I think the hardest thing this time was making sure that we have enough of that experience to carry you through and understand how hard it's going to be, and infuse that with our young players who, it's 6 games over something like 16, 17 days. It's a ridiculous format, and making sure that we have the right balance of people, not just in the locker room and on the pitch, but, so much of your recovery and your preparation, your professionalism happens outside of the white lines. So having that balance was important. I think we've done that. I think coming out of the World Cup, we spent, 6-7 months of really getting players that not just I felt could help us in the Olympics, but players that we want to invest in for 2019. That process has to happen earlier now. So that was the hardest thing, I think, just kind of making sure we've got that right balance. And I feel really good about it. A couple of the last decisions were splitting hairs and really tough. But overall, I think we've got great experience and good blend of our new players.
How hard is it making those rejection phone calls, telling a player who's trained for months that they won't be on the roster for the Olympics?
It is tough. A lot of them I try and do face-to-face. Sometimes, the schedule doesn't permit that. But I had to make a couple of calls to 2 of our younger players, Sam Lewis and Emily Sonnet. And all 4 of the alternates were phenomenally professional. And they don't have to be, but they understand. I think we have a really cool culture in our team, that team first, sounds like a cliche, but we really do embrace that. So those players, the hardest job is going to be as an alternate, because you have to train and push and help everybody. So they have to be the right people. So while I know that they were disappointed, I feel that especially for our younger players, they understand that this Olympics is really an investment in their future, because they're going to be in the thick of it. They're going to be with the team, see the demands of it. And, Press and Klingenberg were alternates in 2012, and it paid us off. So again, I think they're special people. It's a hard choice, but they were incredibly professional about it.
Since the World Cup victory, you've not only overhauled the team's personnel, you've also adjusted the way the team plays football from a transition-based, direct footballing style to one that now comfortable on the ball, possession-hungry, prepared to carve open opponents with their thought, their teamwork, their movement, their intelligence. Did you need to do this? Did you feel the rest of the world was catching up to the direct style of play?
I mean, for sure. I mean, what I love about the international game, I mean, it's intoxicating. I had conversations with the Japanese coach. He at the time, it said, they need to reinvent themselves because people were figuring out how to play against them, how to beat them. And I think, one of the things when I took over the job, I said to the team, if we don't evolve, we will get past. When you're dealing with people that want to be always looking for the next hill to climb, mountain to climb, it's an easy pitch in terms of this is what we need to do. Now, doing it is sometimes a challenge, but the players, that we have the combination of these veterans, these young players. We have, some different tools. One of the things I really want to preach is that possession is a tool. Like, you can't just be a possession team, because ultimately the goal is to score. Possession is to either move an opponent, or lock an opponent. So what we stress with the players is it's about penetration, whether sometimes it is that direct ball in behind to a precision pass to a runner, and sometimes it's beating lines on the ground. And so it's more about what we value, and we value attack and play. And so now what we've layered in is more, I think, substance in different ways we get into the final third, different ways. It's not just, we don't talk about crossing it anymore. We talk about a final pass in the final third, which puts more emphasis on the quality of that ball, whether it's a cutback, whether it's an early ball in behind, I know I'm kind of being nerdy right now, but I'm excited about it. And now we have players that relish that, and we talk about unlocking teams. So it's great, and the players love it. And certainly I think we don't want to be following trends. We kind of want to be setting them, and I think this step in this direction is what needed to happen.
I don't know about being nerdy. You make me want to run through walls just listening to you, Jill. But to compete for and win a place in this final 18, for a long period of time, it did become every woman for herself. I mean, speaking to the players, they all say that you made this selection process feel like a real competition where almost no one was a cert, definitely not for a starter's place. And there was a real sense of swirling doubt for an extended period hanging over the culture of the team. Can you talk about how you go strategically from the hyper-competitive scramble to make the roster to kind of unifying, healing, forging a calm, focused collective out the 18 that you deem battle-ready?
Dang, I was an English major. I love all your adjectives. Yeah, I mean, this next camp we go into, all I will talk about, and when I talk about it, I don't talk about 18, I actually talk about 22. When we went to the World Cup, I always talked about 23, because I think as the leader, you have to make sure that everybody understands their value, and everybody's there to do what's best for the team. So I think part of it is how you approach it, how you talk about it. I also know that, having done this a couple of times, that the players, there is this sudden forge of unity once you've named the roster, once they get in this final camp here. They understand, it's everybody has to, pull in the same direction. It's partly the culture you put up. It's partly the leadership you select. It's communication. I mean, there's so many things that convey the environment you want and the culture you want. And then ultimately, I have the beauty of saying, this is a player that we want involved, and this is a player we don't. Does it have challenges? Of course. You're dealing with people that should have egos. They wouldn't be here without egos. They understand when you step into this environment, because you're competing every day against each other, they understand, the expectation on this team. And that is a very galvanizing situation to be in. Like, you got to win. You need to win. The target's on your back. And it happens naturally, and I think part of it is a coach's job to try and make sure that we create this environment.
I mean, I am interested, because on a squad that's been together this long, cliques inevitably form. I mean, there's those who are getting endorsements at the top of the pyramid, those that think they should. There's the nerd squad, the jocks. I mean, we've all seen The Breakfast Club. How much is that just what a squad is, a collective of smaller collectives? And how much are you aware of the different cliques and actively trying to break them up?
I don't think I've had to actively do that. I mean, I think if you build a trust and a communication with people, they will understand not just your perspective, but other people's roles and responsibilities. And so that, I think, is important. But yeah, as a coach, when I used to stand in front of my college teams, I would say to them straight up, some of you I will be closer to than others. And some of them kind of look at you sideways, but that's human nature. And that's really what a team is. It's a microcosm of society. So much of what I tell our players is, if you want information, you got to own it, meaning I'm not always going to come to you. You need to own the responsibility of seeking it out. And so we've created this dialogue where there is an accountability on them to seek out information. They can't ask their neighbor why they're not starting. Knock on my door, I'll tell you. And so there's just this very blunt, not blunt, harsh, but just a very direct style of telling them how it is. And this is what's been interesting with this team, Roger, is the hierarchy. It shifts because we had so much of the top layer leave in terms of both of our captains. But yeah, for a while, people are figuring out where they fall in the hierarchy within a team, just any organization. But I will say that, and I've heard this feedback, for the young players, they've felt so comfortable and embraced. And obviously they have to get it done on the pitch, or that doesn't happen. So like a player like Pugh, I mean, the players love her, they rib her, they give her a hard time, but it really does feel like a family at times, I mean, there's going to be squabbles and there's going to be issues, but ultimately they realize it doesn't matter how big their endorsement, if we're not successful, it's not going to happen. So we have to make sure we have each other's backs.
A team's overconfidence can also be an undoing. It can kind of defeat itself from within, a bit like Spain, back-to-back Euro champions, 2008 and 12, World Cup won beautifully in between. And then when you talk to the players, they talk about how they became overconfident, lacked collective focus, started to think, we know what we're doing, we got this, tune their coach out a little bit. What steps have you taken with this team to prevent that from happening?
This has never been done. A team hasn't won a World Cup and Olympics. And I'm always the kind of person to dig a little deeper. Was it the rosters were exactly the same, right? Was it from the World Cup to the Olympics? Was it that a team got complacent? Was it that there was a high turnover? Like, what were the reasons? And I couldn't pin it, looking at other teams that have won World Cups and then not won Olympics. I couldn't really pin it down to one thing, but it is something that's been very much in my mind because, yes, complacency, I think, or expecting, I'll be honest, we played a lot of the top teams this year, and it's going to sound terrible to say, but if we'd have lost one of those games, it wouldn't have bothered me much because you have to stay hungry, you have to, be humbled at times. Like our tie against Japan, where we came back from 2-0, we were up 3-2, and we pissed it away in the last minute, that was a valuable lesson. So I think that recognizing those moments where we get to keep our feet on our ground and realize that we can't be, it's not perfect, is important. I think having new players, making a different looking team, feeling team, is also going to help us because the dynamics aren't the same. People have had to go outside their comfort level, and that's the final piece. Like going into the World Cup, I took this team on to different countries and games that we hadn't been on such a journey before in terms of where we played at certain periods. I took them to Brazil and usually our off season, and it was miserable. We didn't do well, but I was trying to make them uncomfortable because it's in those moments that you grow. So I think with this group, whether it's in training, whether it's new ideas, whether it's new personnel, not keeping it status quo is important. But I also think then as a coach, you have to kind of now rein it in and start to get things really clicking. And it is going to be challenging. So I've said this to the players. It won't be perfect. And ultimately, it's them understanding you can't just show up anymore. You can't. It's gone of those days. I mean, it's entirely evident in the men's game, and it's been really evident in the women's game.
I read that you interrogated every player to make sure they were still hungry, focused after the delirious triumph last summer. Can you tell us about this process? What were you looking for and how did you find it out?
Well, I think part of it goes back to, if you really want to know where they're at, you sit down one-on-one with them. And so, I would straight up ask them. My assistant, Tony, kind of put it like he's a Swedish guy, so it was a little bit graphic, but he sort of said, last summer going into the World Cup, it's almost like there's a knife to your throat. There's this expectation of this country. The players were almost desperate because some of them were going to, be leaving the game and da-da-da. So there was this high motivation, high energy, almost survival mode, right? So that's kind of what I wanted to see is, where are we now? Are we licking our chops or are we hungry to make history and be the first team to do something. And it is. I mean, I think these teams in the dynasties that are built, that's amazing for coaches to sustain success, because you have to make sure that people are where they need to be at that moment. So I think that was part of my, was just trying to dig a little deeper in terms of where are you mentally. The other thing that's so different this year is they've been with their clubs. We didn't have that last year. They were maybe in with their clubs for a little tiny bit, but I basically had control of everything. This year, it's like all the other countries. They've been in with their clubs. The difference is our players, the Portland Thorns have traveled like 26,000 miles. It's not like Europe where you get on a train for 2 hours. So the template right now is very different in terms of where they are. So a big part of this for me is where are they mentally, where are they physically? Because that's, 6 games in however many days it is, that's a big part of it in terms of the mental piece. So that's, I think, where, led me to sit down and talk to some of them and ask them, where are we at? Where do you think we're at? Do you think we're a cohesive unit? And just asking them questions, because I want to do everything I possibly can to make this work,
I've got this mental picture of Megan Klingenberg in a polygraph test. I love it. It's funny you mentioned dynasties, 'cause I've been reading a lot about them in preparation for this interview, reading Sir Alex Ferguson, Bill Belichick. One of the most interesting quotes I found was from Jerry Krause, who won 6 championship rings as the general manager of the Chicago Bulls. He once remarked, organizations win championships. Do you agree with that?
I would have to agree with some of that. Yeah, I would, because, if you don't have a support network that allows you to, whether it's put together the schedule you want, buy the players you want, obviously if you're in the professional ranks, if you don't have people that are on the same page with you, then I think it will be impossible, because it's not just the talent, it's everything. I credit all of my staff, the medical staff, everybody has a massive role. And if you don't have that infrastructure, I don't think talent nowadays, when the margins are so thin, it's not just about talent. It has to be, about people behind the scenes. Our sports scientist does a ridiculous amount of work to make sure we're where we need to be. So it's a lot more involved in that. So I do think, organizations, a commitment to continue to grow has to be a cornerstone of a successful program.
The Olympics kicks off for the United States August 3rd against New Zealand in Belo Horizonte. You'll then travel 1,800 miles just in the group stage to play France and Colombia in the dreaded Manaus over the next 6 days. To win the tournament, you play 6 games with little recovery time, huge travel. What is the biggest challenge as you're thinking about this Olympics? Is it the travel, the logistics, the recovery time, or is it the footballing opponent?
I think the physical and the mental piece are a big part. If we're in a good place and we got legs, I think that we can do great things. So I think that's a massive part of it. I think that also, touches on the roster selection. I think we have versatility. I think our attacking unit, that front group, can play any of those, the 7, the 11, the 9. There's that versatility and depth. So, I think the U.S. have historically been very successful at the Olympics because I think we are usually one of the most fit teams. So I think that the physical piece is important, the mental piece. And, I said this the other day, it's like we're playing quarterfinalists of the World Cup in our group stage. We're going to play in our quarterfinals. We'll probably play semifinals from the finalists of the World Cup. So it just, because it's such a smaller group, it's a much more concentrated schedule in terms of the quality of the opponent. It's going to be really, really challenging. But I think the travel piece is, something, logistics, making sure, behind the scenes we're working really hard to, I think there's 1 flight a day from Belo Horizonte to Manaus. Well, you've got to get 2 teams and all their stuff up there on a small plane. Now, how's that going to happen? So, there's a lot of things that U.S. soccer is working on to make sure that we have the resources, because FIFA, they oversee the tournament, but they don't run it. So it is a very different kind of setup in terms of an organization.
You talk a lot about this team's journey. I want to finish by returning to your journey, because it is remarkable, Jill. You moved to the United States in 1981 when your father took up coaching soccer over here. The family settled in Virginia. Your father, John, coached the mighty Annandale Boys Club. Back then, in the 1980s, in England, the Dark Ages, very few women played soccer. Your father once said it was considered unladylike in the United Kingdom. To what extent do you look at your life and thank God that you had the good fortune to move to America, land of the free, home of the brave, and the epicenter of football played by women.
It was an absolute game changer. You know, I had to do a speech one time, and you look at all the major junctures in your life, and that was the biggest one. You know, if my mom and dad hadn't picked it all up at whatever old they were and came over here and rolled the dice on being, immigrants, it wouldn't have happened because I wouldn't have had these opportunities. So I feel remarkably blessed. I mean, not just to be able to play the sport, but to actually have a career. There's no way I would have ever dreamed that I would have had a career coaching football, growing up in England. There's no way. So, yeah, I mean, last year after the World Cup, my mom and dad came down, and I actually put the medal around their necks and said, well, you're a massive part of this, because without them, I wouldn't have had this journey.
Without them, you would have been the world's greatest technical writer. But
well, probably not. I wasn't so motivated in that area.
but can you just describe the feeling that you experienced as a young girl when you stepped off the plane here in the US and you realised that you could get a game here with other girls and not just have to play with your brother and his mates?
Well, I tell you, this kind of sums up, like, I thought one of the most amazing things was when I was handed a jersey, like a uniform. I'm like, oh my God. I mean, then I knew that this was real. I had to pinch myself because, I'd never put a jersey on in my life unless I got one for Christmas, But it was that moment I realized I'm actually doing this. And I remember the coach saying, well, where do you play? I said, anywhere you need me, because I wasn't really drilled in 11-a-side. I'd only played, pick up my brother. So I just think at that point, I loved it. I was a pretty decent field hockey player in England and always dreamed about playing hockey for England, And then I came over here. I'm like, forget that, man. This is my sport. I love it. So I feel very, very fortunate. Love it.
It is a joy to hear that story. Yentl is one of my favorite movies. You are like the footballing Yentl. But you're born in Portsmouth, England. You're a naturalized American citizen. I do wonder, and I won't put you on the spot because it will make headlines in England, if the English men's national team came calling, whether you would consider that job, because Lord knows, Jill Ellis, they need you. Jill.
Oh, you're sweet.
Thousands and thousands of our listeners across the nation join me in saying this, because I want to wish you and your team Godspeed as you set off to Brazil. We wish you health, happiness, and